This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kathy Neifeld with Agency One. It is Wednesday, June 17th. If everybody could put themselves on mute, that would be great. Thank you. It's Wednesday, June 17th, and I am pleased to bring you our weekly webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about an underwriting update, 100 days into the COVID pandemic. Where are we? It doesn't feel like 100 days. It feels like it's been a lifetime already. And I think it's really more than 100 days, but we've got a terrific panel to go into everything that's been happening in the underwriting world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Karakoff, our VP of Underwriting, and she is going to introduce our speakers and kick this off. So with that, Jessica, take it away.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. Yeah, so over the last few months, we have been inundated with varying facts and figures as it relates to the coronavirus, its transmission and testing. The insurance companies initially reacted by nixing foreign travel, tightening up underwriting guidelines and limiting coverage on certain ages, rate classes, and clients with pre-existing medical condition. At Agency One, we have started to see clients that have been infected with COVID-19 enter underwriting, which results now in another broad collection of guidelines to monitor. So with the dust seemingly, hopefully, beginning to settle, we thought we would sort of recenter and really kind of talk about where we are now as it pertains to the pandemic. So we asked two industry icons to join us to help us sort this out from a medical and lab testing perspective. Dennis and I will follow with where we are in terms of underwriting. But we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to use your chat function to ask any questions that you may have. And this can be a personal question, a professional question, anything that you want to ask these professionals is open. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to these two professionals that are so highly regarded in our industry. Dr. Frank is our fearless medical director. He is a board certified in internal and insurance medicine and has served on numerous committees and has extensive experience in the role of medical director, most recently serving as the Chief Medical Director for Emeritus. I'll have to tell you guys, although he spent a lot of years on the carrier side, I can assure you he's adjusted very, very well in helping us negotiate against some of the more conservative positions those underwriters take. On to my friend, Betsy Sears, who is the Executive Vice President of Laboratory Strategy and Sales at Exam One. A self-proclaimed lab nerd, Betsy has been working in the insurance medical testing industry for 30 years, starting with Osborne Laboratories, where she wrote lab procedures, managed lab operations, qualities and inspections, recruited staff, and essentially built and grew one of the first insurance laboratories in the country from scratch, which was eventually acquired by Lab One and is now what we know as Exam One. What I love personally most about Betsy is her ability to present on labs and tests that most people can't even pronounce and still have her listeners walk away having learned something. So with that, thank you both for joining us and for giving us your time. It's really important to us to be able to share this information with our producers, so thank you. We're going to begin with Dr. Frank, who will break down what we need to know about coronavirus. Take it away, Dr. Frank.
Thank you, Jessica. Hope I can live up to that introduction there. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for being here today. I'm just going to say a few words about coronavirus in terms of, where it came from, some clinical aspects, recovery about it, et cetera, and then leave the laboratory part of it and insurance part of it to some of our other experts. But anyway, the coronavirus 19, also commonly referred to as COVID-19, which is coronavirus 19 disease, that's where the name comes from, is a novel virus. By that we mean it's new, it's unknown. A lot of things about this is unknown. It's a single-stranded RNA virus with an envelope. Interestingly, when I was, was reading a lot about this and paying attention to it, how similar this is to some viruses that would have been in the past too. So the genome sequence of COVID-19 is 96% identical to a bat coronavirus, okay? And it's 80% identical to the coronavirus SARS from 2002. So there's some similarities but differences. A lot of people ask, where did it come from? Okay, well, nobody can say with 100% certainty, but likely COVID-19 resulted from a viral antigenic change, okay, from a bat virus. That's presumed what happens to the MERS and the SARS viruses too, okay? So there was a subtle change in viral antigenicity from a bat coronavirus, enabling it to become more infectious to human. Whether or not there was an intermediate host between the bat and us is unknown at the present time. But you have to realize that coronaviruses are widespread in humans and animals, especially all kinds of animals. That term is zoonotic, referred to the viruses in the animals. In the past, there's been 3 major groups of coronavirus that cause human disease, okay? In 2002, there was an outbreak referred to as SARS-CoV-2, or SARS-CoV. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, and that was a group 3 coronavirus. Interestingly, that was kind of a short-lived episode, and it's pretty much disappeared, so you really can't find anybody suffering from that particular virus. In 2012, there was a second outbreak of a coronavirus, and that was the MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome COVID virus, or coronavirus, okay? That was a group 2. The thing about that has kind of lingered around. At first, it was kind of a small epidemic type of thing, but there's still cases of MERS coronavirus popping up here and there all the time. So that thing has hung around now for, 8 or so years, okay? And then there's also several other group 2 coronaviruses that cause common human colds, upper respiratory syndromes. So the COVID-19 pandemic that we're undergoing is really the 3rd major change in the coronaviruses causing an epidemic in the past, 18 years, since 2002. And of interest too, with the SARS and with the MERS, they were also felt to be a viral mutation from the bat virus that allowed it to infect the humans, okay? So there was an adaptive mutation that occurred. Also, I thought it was interesting that because a lot of things about COVID-19, because it's so new, we don't really know all the answers to. But it is known that with both the MERS and the SARS viruses from 2002 and 2012, there were asymptomatic carriers of that virus, okay? And it was also found too, interestingly, that immunity from both of these was rather incomplete. So somebody that did get MERS could turn around and probably get MERS later on. Whether or not those things, pan out with the COVID, we don't know. But, you have to look back historically, I think, at this COVID-19 cousins and see, how similar they are, and is the history of COVID-19 going to be similar to what they were in the past? A little thing about the clinical implications of it, okay? The COVID-19 virus can infect the cells of the upper respiratory tract and the lung alveolar cells, okay? It can also infect other tissue too. So endothelial cells, gastrointestinal tract cells, and cells in the kidneys can also be attacked and destroyed by the coronavirus. The principal spread is by droplet. And I know somebody asked a question, and a lot of people have been asking this question is, can you catch it in other ways, okay? In theory, yes, okay? You have to understand that anytime you catch a disease of whether it's bacterial or viral, there's a certain amount of inoculum that has to occur for you to get infection. So being exposed to, 1 or 2 bacteria or 1 or 2 little viruses is probably not going to do it. So if somebody happens to have coronavirus or has COVID, sneezes on their hand, opens the door to a store and you walk in 30 seconds behind them and grab a hold of that, yes, on that surface, you could probably, you catch the virus, okay? And I know people have gone around and, done PCR testing on all kinds of things, boxes and this and that and this and that. But isolating a virus from something with those sensitive measures and that being in a clinical inoculum enough to cause disease are not one and the same thing, okay? So just because you can find the virus living for 2 days, on a box delivered from UPS doesn't mean you could catch it from that. So, I mean, it's okay to take precautions, but still, the main source of infection is droplet. Okay, just leave it at that. The typical inoculation period for COVID-19 is 5 days, although it can be longer, up to 14 days. Okay, if you go back and look at its cousins, MERS and SARS, they had variable incubation periods of 2 to 10 days, averaging about 5 or 6, similar to what COVID is. Okay, the COVID-19 virus attacks certain receptor sites. Okay, and these receptor sites allows it to bind, enter the cell, kill the cell, or start to replicate and then kill the cell. Okay, these particular receptor sites that COVID-19 virus attacks are called the ACE2. ACE is the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 sites, and you find these cell sites in the upper respiratory tract, in the lungs, in the heart, in the kidneys, in the endothelial cells. We already said it attacks those, so it can only attack tissue that has these ACE2 receptor sites. Okay, so the virus, it binds to these receptor sites, then it's able to enter the cell and do its damage. Of interest, there's been a lot of talk about why kids don't get COVID as bad or even at all compared to adults. There's been some recent stuff, and in fact, this week's JAMA journal of the AMA had an editorial about that, saying it may have something to do with children express less of the ACE2 sites than adults do. So that might naturally make them a little bit more immune to getting it, okay? If you don't have the receptor sites available, the virus can't attack you, okay? It's definitely been proven, though, that the COVID-19 virus can be asymptomatic, okay? I think we're going to find out when this thing is all said and done in the near future that there's a lot more asymptomatic and minimally symptomatic people than there are sick people, okay? But the clinical syndrome can be anywhere from totally asymptomatic to very mild symptoms. You heard about these people having just a mild cold, or all they did was lose their sense of taste and smell, etc., to people with more severe lung involvement with acute respiratory distress syndrome going on to respiratory failure. Again, last week I happened to be talking to some pulmonologist and intensive care person up in Ohio who's been doing some research on this, and he was talking about the thing that interests a lot of researchers the most, again, is back to this inoculum load, okay? Why do some people get asymptomatic disease and some people get more severe disease? We really don't know the answer to that. We know there are high-risk groups for getting more severe disease, but why some people might have no symptoms or minimal compared to people that get moderately sick, okay? It may have something to do with that, again, that inoculum and that load. If you're exposed just to a small amount of inoculum viral load, by the time the virus is kind of up and trying to do its things, your immune system has already kicked into gear to attack it. If you get this huge inoculum, though, okay, because your spouse that you were living with came down with it, and you were just they just got a huge amount of exposure to inoculum, maybe that might be the reason that you had more severe disease. We don't know that for certain, but to me that makes sense because it fits with what a lot of other infectious diseases have been in the past. Okay, we do know that there are certain groups of people though that are high risk for more severe disease, complications, and death. Okay, and those risk factors include older age, older than 55 or 60, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, chronic kidney disease, and any kind of chronic lung disease such as COPD. Another point I wanted to make too, it's also been pretty much shown, and we know this again from SARS or from MERS and SARS back in 2002, that asymptomatic people can spread the virus. Okay, asymptomatic people can spread the virus. That's probably the reason things are where they are right now across the world, because of all these asymptomatic people. You think back in the typical flu season, people get the flu right away. They think, oh, I got the flu, I'm going to stay home, and stay home for a week. They don't go to work. They don't go around any of their friends or other family and stuff like that until they get better. People that have this are totally asymptomatic have been going out into public places and crowds, etc., and spreading it. In terms of the pathophysiology, we mentioned about it attacks cells that have this ACE2 receptor site, okay? So in the lungs itself, it particularly damages two different types of alveolar cells, okay? The alveoli line alveolar sacs, which is the functioning unit of our lungs where oxygen and CO2 are go back and forth. So the type 1 alveolar cells that do gas exchange, those cells are attacked, damaged, and killed, okay? And the type 2 alveolar cells that produce surfactant, and surfactant, is the substance that keeps alveolar sacs open and keeps them from collapsing. So between killing the cells that do the gas exchange and killing the cells that keep alveolar sacs open, causing microatelectasis, you can see all of a sudden oxygenation of our red blood cells is markedly inhibited, and so you end up with respiratory failure. So they've also found on doing autopsy studies, there's a lot of endothelial blood vessel damage with microangiopathy and microthrombosis, okay? So there's more than just attacking the alveolar cells. There's fine little capillaries and arterioles. There's thrombosis there, okay? Again, contributing to the respiratory failure, okay? There are also some people we know that have something called a cytokine storm, in which their immune system kind of overreacts and causes widespread inflammation. And so those people can end up not only with respiratory failure, but multi-system organ failure too, okay? So it's a nasty virus in terms of how it attacks you and what it does. Talking a few words about treatment, there's not a lot to say because we have no proven treatment, okay? Promising has been remdesivir and convalescent plasma. I think convalescent plasma right now has a little more promise in terms of helping somebody, but that's in short supply. And even though the remdesivir is preliminary wise has been shown to be helpful, it's going to take a while, okay, probably months and months yet before we're able to know from randomized trials whether or not it really helped or not. So right now we have no effective treatment. It's basically just supportive, okay? It's fluid balance. It's if they get sick enough, they're on oxygen. If they get sicker, they're on a respirator. And if they're even sicker after that, there's something called ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, your artificial lung that they can use temporarily too. So at that point in time, though, the person is critically ill. And most of the people so far that end up on respirators or ECMO do not survive. And most of those people are some of these people with other comorbid conditions. Now, moving on to talking about recovery, okay, several days after the virus infects you, okay, you begin to produce IgM, which is the acute phase antibody reactant, and then within a week later start producing some IgG, your longer term antibody, okay? The IgM and the IgG antibodies then is what enables your body then to start fighting this virus and begin to slowly rid your body of the virus, okay? So that will begin to occur within several days after infection, although it does take, a week or two for it to kick up into high gear and get working, okay? It's known that some people, though, have a muted antibody response. Why that is so, you don't know. Obviously, there are certain people that have immune diseases, so you can understand why they would have a muted antibody response. But there are other individuals that have that, and we don't know why. And those are some of the people then that are going to go on and have more severe disease. Okay, so generally and speaking, by about 2 or 3 weeks out, when your antibody production is kicked into high gear, the viral load will start to decrease, okay, and recovery will start to occur. Right now, we do not know if there's protective immunity, okay? You know, you might say, well, it's common sense, it's logical that, you know, once you produce the antibodies, you should have long-term immune response, but guess what? That doesn't work all the time, does it? We know that with SARS, again, go back to its cousins, the SARS coronavirus, antibody levels persisted in good levels for about 6 months, and then gradually diminished over 1 or 2 years. And by 2 years out, you couldn't even find any SARS-2 antibody around. The MERS coronavirus antibodies levels persisted for at least 3 or 4 or 5 years after that. So it seemed like you had more lasting immunity with that. But then you go back to some of its other cousins that cause, they're cutting my grass out back, so. Okay, sorry about that, and I hope you can still hear me. Anyway, if you go back to its cousins that cause the common cold, the coronaviruses, okay, we know that 3 of those coronaviruses, you do not develop any immunity whatsoever. So you can get, you know, recurrent common cold after common cold after common cold. Now, the reason for that, maybe there's a genetic mutation going on all the time that, you know, causes you to get the reinfection. So it's a new virus because it's changed antigenically. But it also may be that your antibody response was just not permanent enough to give you some protection, okay? So right now, we don't know if people that have had COVID-19 will be immune in the future. And that's also a big question for development of the vaccine. Because if you develop a vaccine, but they give it to you and you get immunity for 6 months, what good does that do too? So it's going to be a long while before vaccines even develop. But even if they develop it, it's going to be a while before we find out how long the immunity lasts from that, okay? Hopefully, it would be long lasting. Of course, you know, we know with our flu, we have to get our flu shot every year. Maybe we'd have to do something like that with COVID-19 too. I'm going to say a couple quick words about underwriting considerations, but leave some of that to Jessica and to Dennis. From my standpoint, if you had the disease and you're fully recovered without any sequelae, okay, then to me, you should be standard, not, you know, somebody not even worried about it, okay? So most of the people that get it treat themselves at home, not even have to go to the hospital. We shouldn't even worry about. If they do have to be hospitalized, it seems reasonable that a carrier would want to say, well, we want to find out how severe this person's disease was, okay? So if they were in a hospital, they required oxygen supplementation, they were actually on the ICU on a respirator, those people could end up with some permanent lung damage. And so the insurance company needs to look at that person. And from my standpoint, I'd look at them just like you would anybody with lung disease, you know, like you would underwrite them as you would somebody with COPD. What do their pulmonary function tests look like now that they've recovered? Do they have any permanent lung damage that would make them a high risk for the future? Somebody asked a question about masks. I'm not going to spend much time with that, but they do help. I mean, I said the primary method of transmission was droplet. So if a person has the disease, whether they're symptomatic or not, if they're wearing a mask, their droplet stuff is going to be stopped a lot from their mask. And then if you have a mask, okay, then even if some of their droplets leak out, it's going to help you a little bit. Things that I've heard on the TV and read in the journals and from my friend up in Ohio, I'm just estimating the mask gives you about a 25% protection yourself. And if the other person's wearing a mask, and that rate of protection goes up to 50 to 60%. So to me, it's better than nothing, okay? And one last thing, there's this side part of the COVID-19 virus called the pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome. It kind of looks like Kawasaki disease. Kids with this will get respiratory failure. They're younger kids. The median age is 9 years old. So far, about 90% of the kids that have met the criteria for this syndrome have tested positive for the COVID antibody. in one study about a couple weeks ago in the JAMA, they looked at 58 kids that had this, and interestingly, 1/4 of them actually met the criteria for Kawasaki's disease. The other met the criteria for your pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, and about 1 in 6 of them did have coronary artery aneurysms, which are the hallmark of Kawasaki's disease too. So I hope I didn't go over my time, but I'm going to stop right there and pass the baton on to, I believe, Betsy, right?
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Frank. Now Betsy's going to talk to us about what the labs are doing.
Okay, can you hear me, Jessica?
I sure can.
Okay, thank you for your lovely introduction. I've known Jessica for a long time, and tell you what, if I could interact with Jessica and work with her on a daily basis, I think life would be so much better for sure. Anyway, thank you for the nice intro. And Bob, I had to laugh on the grass cutters. In the middle of so many webinars in the last few weeks. It's dogs or FedEx guy or something. So I'm sure I'll have some kind of interruption as well, but that made me giggle. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly tell you about where we are in the Exam One world. Again, because we're not just doing the labs, we've got, you know, oversight of our Paramed and a lot of data products. The pandemic has kind of affected us in a lot of different ways. I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, hey, Dr. Frank, can you hit mute on your screen bottom left-hand side? Is where you can mute yourself and unmute yourself for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the Paramed. You know, back in March, that was really the first area where we really felt the hit of the pandemic. And it has been a fluid situation ever since then. Back in mid-March, we had some states declining, you know, Paramed, they couldn't do their jobs in certain states, and then states would open back up. But one of the first things we did was we came up with a set of questions for the applicant to be asked when a Paramed exam was being scheduled. You know, have they been exposed, temperature, fever, all of that information. So that was kind of the first layer. And if someone had symptoms or had been exposed, we typically delayed that a 14-day period. So I think at the height of this, March and through probably mid-May, we were down about 40% exams, and we had delayed or canceled or postponed. In that time frame, again, states in and out of allowing Paramed exams, we started acquiring PPE for our examiners. So all examiners now are required to have the face mask, a shield, gloves, and a lab coat. They are supposed to have no skin exposed at all, and they are not to do an exam without that PPE. We had some challenge in the beginning, get that, and now it's not an issue at all. So questions posed, then the PPE, so feeling pretty good. If that applicant was comfortable and okay with getting an exam, we felt we were doing it in a safe manner. One of the big advantages from being owned by Quest is our parent, is all the patient service centers that we have at our fingertips. There are about 2,300 patient service centers around the country that are equipped to do our insurance exams where they will have a scheduled specific time. We also felt that offering has helped our applicants feel a little bit more secure. Again, they have a specific scheduled time. They are in charge of that. Most of the PSCs had the applicants wait in their cars, and they were texted. You know, they scheduled, you know, the applicants far apart so you wouldn't have any kind of crowd. So we've seen a pretty big lift in our PSC, the patient service center utilization. Many more choosing to do that in a professional site. by opening up the additional patient service centers that I think we opened up another 1,000 in August. That gives our Exam One network 100,000 extra pyramid spots, scheduled spots availability every month. So we're pretty happy about that. So I'll move on from exam, and again, at the end, I can answer any questions. So again, the exam, it's been, we are back up. We're seeing maybe a 15% reduction in our exam business, you know, compared to 45% that we saw in March and April. So getting back there. We also have some data products at the lab, as more of our clients have not chosen to go the fluid route. Again, yes, I am a lab nerd, so I love fluids, Jessica said. But we do have a lot of data products, and one of the very popular selling like hotcakes is Lab Picture. That's been available for about 4 years. It is a data product where we, with some patient applicant information, we can immediately pull clinical records going back 7 years from Quest, corporate, and from LabCorp. So if that your applicant has gone to a physician in the last 7 years and tests have been ordered, blood, urine, cytology, pathology, any of that, and that lab work has gone to either Quest or LabCorp, we can pull those lab results, and it's an instant result. So we have seen a really high uptick in the number of clients. A lot of clients were beginning to use it anyway, and it's kind of an automated underwriting, accelerated underwriting platform. But now with the pandemic, in cases where our life insurance companies can't get an exam, it's been postponed or canceled, they can at least try and get some information. And the good news is we have about a 60 to 65% hit rate on our Lab Picture. In certain pockets of the country where there's heavier presence with big Quest labs and LabCorp, we have a higher hit rate. You also get a higher hit rate on your older ages. So Lab Picture, a big success story. Now quickly I'll finish up with the lab, where we are there. Again, Quest is our parent, and very proud to be a part of that group. They have done some pretty amazing things, really starting back in January as far as research goes for the COVID. A big R&D laboratory in San Juan Capistrano, and they've done some amazing research. But all the testing that we are doing, everything that started back in March, is all overseen by the FDA, and it's called EUA. It's Emergency Use Authorization. And the FDA grants this authorization in times of, you know, like an emergency, like in the middle of a pandemic. So really none of the assays that are available and out there now are what we call FDA approved, but they are all EUA authorized. And Quest that has vetted out exhaustively in research laboratories before we bring that online. So if we go back to March, the first tests that were available were what we call diagnostic, the molecular test. And those were the ones, some people describe it. I have had one, and it feels like, not that I've ever had a brain biopsy, but it would feel like that. They stick the swab way up inside. And that is called the diagnostic molecular testing, PCR testing, where we are actually looking for little bits of nucleic acid, bits of that virus from the SARS-CoV-2. That testing started in mid-March. Again, all done on nasal swabs and done at all the Quest laboratories across the country. Right now, we have the capability there are about 28 Quest laboratories across the country. We have the capability to do about 105,000 molecular PCR viral load tests every single day. And as of last week, June 8th, Quest had performed 3.8 million viral load tests. Again, looking for the virus. And this would be diagnostic. If that tested positive, we would say that individual at that moment in time was infected and most likely shedding virus. About a 1 to 3 day turnaround time. The second test that became available in this pandemic is our antibody test. You all are much more familiar with that. The antibody, you see HIV antibody on a lab report, you see hepatitis C antibody. Compared to the viral load test, it's a very, very simple assay. It's called an enzyme immunoassay. And we are detecting, Bob went through and talked about the IgM that first peaks, but it's that IgG that gives that, is there longer and present, again, when someone's viral load would go down. The test that we are using by Quest, when we started the antibody testing at April 21st, Quest decided to bring on board 3 to 4 emergency use authorization kits just to, make our capacity more robust. Now, for most laboratories, we're down to 2 assays, Roche and Ortho, and like I said, they've been vetted out, over and over again by Roche, by Ortho, and then in our research laboratories. I've got some slides that show, particularly for the Roche assay, 99 to 100% specificity. So when you get a positive for that antibody, you're not picking up an antibody from any other SARS virus. You have to feel pretty good about that. We now have the capability across all of Quest to test about 200,000 patients a day, 200,000 a day for the antibody test. Now that is a blood test right now that we are testing in the laboratory. And as of last week, we had tested about 1.65 million serological tests. So that antibody, Bob also talked about, what the heck is, why are we testing for it? We don't know that it doesn't, there's no proof of immunity yet. We are hopeful that it will mimic some of the other SARS viruses, and some of the early research is leading us in that direction. But right now, an antibody positive, what does that tell us? Somebody's been exposed to that virus, antibody is positive, and it's good for sure for surveillance. So we know what pockets, how the virus has been spread, what pockets have a higher prevalence in this country where people have been infected, and for sure to identify those that we could potentially use for convalescent plasma that has been used successfully in many situations to transfuse a very ill individual with COVID. So insurance, the insurance laboratory, that was kind of all clinical side. Our insurance platform will now be ready in about 2.5 weeks. For that, we are adopting that antibody test, the SARS, the COVID-2 IgG will be done same way it's done for a clinical mass. We have in our laboratory in Kansas City, we have the capability of doing up to 20,000 antibody assays a day. So probably the beginning of July, we'll be ready to go. It was a slow process. We have a different platform than the clinical platform. We had a couple of challenges. The FDA changed some of the language that will go on the report. And we also had a little bit of a challenge. We will be reporting every positive and negative result to the State Department of Health. And that's a good thing. Again, that's going to help with surveillance. But in the past, we've only reported positive HIVs, positive hepatitis. So this is a new game for us, and it took a while to kind of come up with a platform to get those results to the State Department of Health. We couldn't start.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Dennis. I have a question right there. So in 2.5 weeks, the labs are going to have the ability to test for antibodies and exposure to this virus. And
Correct.
On every blood test that you're performing for the insurance company labs, you're going to be doing this test?
This is if the test will be ready. We have a technical bulletin went out to all clients about 3 to 4 weeks ago. identifying, this is the test that we are bringing on board. And we said, I think we said June 25th at that point, here's the name of the test, here's there's all sorts of IT lingo, a test code, so that the IT folks would be ready at companies that decided to test. We've had conversations with many clients, and clients will choose. We're not going to run it on everyone. Clients will authorize us to do that, and we've had many conversations. So some clients are looking to just order it ad hoc, as needed. Some clients are going to be setting this up on the at-risk population over a certain age, and have talked about potentially underwriting more favorably if the antibody is positive, even though we know it doesn't prove immunity, but the thought is that it might, and that an insurance company might feel more comfortable knowing your 72-year-old applicant is antibody positive. And the third way, some of the companies have actually talked about offering this and running it on all their applicants, because it's the right thing to do, because many people want to know their antibody status, and some of the companies say, we want to do this for at least a few months. We think it'll be a big perk for the clients. And when we do, so we have to be authorized.
When you say client, you're talking about the insurance companies as clients.
Yes, I am.
And when we say client, we're talking about the individual insured that's going in and having his blood drawn. And I want to tell you, from a personal standpoint, if a paramed is going to draw my blood right now, I'd love to have that antibody test, paid for by the insurance company. If the insurance company client of yours doesn't pay for that test, I mean, I'd throw down my credit card and pay you for the results.
It's so interesting, and I don't want to take too much time, but it's really interesting you said that. So right now we have to wait till we have authorization from the insurance company. It would be set up as part of their medical orders. On this, the carrier will set it up on this age group, order it on everyone. We'll take our orders, and that will be built into our ordering system. We had someone with an idea. It's like, because it is a little bit pricier than a normal, like a CBC or running an alcohol screen on an apple. It's a little bit pricier right now, those antibody tests, until, well, they're just pricey right now. So someone had the idea, if somebody had their blood being drawn at a patient service center, and again, this would have to be arranged with the carrier ahead of time, that if they said that we would offer, hey, your company has authorized you to have COVID antibody test, are you interested? If they said yes, the insurance company would pay this much, and then the applicant would pay this much. Again, far less than they would pay if they were, going online and ordered a Quest Direct test. So we're just trying to work out. Right now, those patient service centers aren't set up to take a credit card from a life insurance applicant. So it's interesting that you would say that, and we would love to try and figure out a way to do that. But right now, we will rely on the authorization from our life insurance company. This is the population we want you to test, and this is what we will pay for that.
Well, I'm hoping that they test everyone, because if they do test and someone tests positive for presence of the antibody, that makes them a better risk in my mind. Okay? And I will use that absolutely to my advantage in the negotiation.
I would agree with you, and I think most of our carriers are feeling the same way. And I know I've gone over. The last thing really quickly I want to say is Quest had approved, they're continuously looking at new ways to get antibody or viral status on an individual. They received a new emergency use authorization from the FDA at the end of May on a nasal specimen, not the deep swab, but just kind of a cotton swab right inside, rubbed against the nares of the nose, where individuals can do that self-collection, ship it back to Quest, and have results within a couple of days. So Quest is working with healthcare groups, state employers, and we have a big initiative working with universities for students going back Students will be screened ahead of time when they get to campus, etc. So that is that's happening now. Anyway, that's it. And I went over. I'm sorry, Jessica.
No, that's fine, because listen, I can talk to these producers anytime. I want to be able to tap into your and Dr. Frank's knowledge as much as possible. We do have a couple of questions. I'm gonna get those out here. And I'm not sure, this might be for Dr. Frank or Betsy. If someone has had COVID-19, will the insurance companies look at IgG levels to determine whether the proposed insured will be extended coverage?
Well, I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, I would think they should look at that as a positive aspect. Like Dennis said, you know, if a carrier is hesitant to start offering policies because a person comes from a high-risk area or whatever, okay? In fact, I just got a case from somebody yesterday where this person had made an application a short while back. As they went through the process, it turns out they were postponed, and the agent told me they were postponed because of the COVID epidemic. Now, this person does have underlying lung disease too, so maybe they thought he is high risk. But I mean, if they're going to take that conservative type of approach, then they also have to, you know, do the other side of the coin, which is if they have an antibody test and it's positive, and we can't guarantee that gives immunity, but it's a logical argument, like Dennis said, that you could use it to your advantage. Then if the person had a positive antibody, you should be able to say to the carrier, don't worry about this person. He's fine. He's not going to die from COVID-19.
Right.
So yes, I think you can use that way.
And just
real
to
quick,
add to that, oh, go ahead.
Just the only thing I was going to say, right now, the IgG test from what I consider the pristine, highest quality manufacturer, Roche, the test we're doing right now, both Quest and Exam One, is just IgG positive, negative. You have it or you don't. The tests now that are giving levels of that IgG are kind of research use only right now. Those will be far more sophisticated tests and far more expensive. So right now, what we will be able to tell you is yay or nay, you have the antibody or you don't. So.
Right, and I don't think the level of the IgG should make a difference. I agree with Bess. It's either positive or negative. That's all you need to know.
Agreed.
Yeah, and as far as underwriting guidelines that we've seen established, Swiss Re, which is a pretty important manual in the industry, a lot of companies use it. They've indicated that if you have a positive antibody, that you basically have to attest that you haven't had symptoms for 3 months. And at that point, you'd be +0, which means standard or what you would otherwise qualify for. So I think that as it gains momentum, we'll see carriers trying to use it in creative ways to get business done for sure. Okay, so we have another question. How will the insurance companies view an insured candidate if a spouse or immediate family member has COVID-19, but the insured did not have symptoms or was asymptomatic? Is it a non-issue at that point? I can answer at least from an underwriting guideline standpoint. All of the companies are using these broad spectrum questioning, like, have you been exposed to? Have you been around this or that? And with that, they're taking a stance of kind of a 14-day waiting period to see if you've had any symptoms, some of them 30 days. So a known exposure will often result in them kind of holding off anywhere from 2 weeks to a month's time before they'll underwrite, and they'll want you to, you know, sign in blood that you haven't had any symptoms or what have you. I have a question about testing also. I've heard multiple reports, obviously, and I even have a couple personal friends who had all of the symptoms, you know, lost taste, lost smell, shortness of breath, aches, fatigues, all of that. They didn't go to the hospital because they weren't necessarily at a super high risk and they didn't want to risk spreading anything, but then later had a test, then another test, all which were negative. In one situation, it was the fourth test that was positive. And I've heard a couple different stories that kind of follow this path. Is there a reason that somebody wouldn't test positive but carry all these symptoms, and then why would they test positive after the fact? And it could just be the accuracy of the tests that were used.
Well, it's
Are you
not so much the
talking antibody or
Go ahead, Betsy.
are you talking antibody, Jessica?
No, I'm
or
talking
the viral load.
Viral
Okay.
load.
The PCR test is accurate if you can get the virus, you know, if you get the virus on your swab. So to me, of the tests that are negative, it's the fault of the procedure. You know, did they ram that thing up your nose far enough? What was the viral load up your nose? A lot of, I think it's been shown that some of the throat swabs are not as accurate as the nasopharynx type of thing. You know, they just go in and kind of just dab the back of your throat. In fact, my wife and I went, because it was free, we went and waited in line and had that done about 2.5 weeks ago. And the person doing the test, they just, to me, barely touched the back of my throat with it, you know. It's like, I don't know, if there was some virus in there, would they really pick it up, you know? And then after you do that, there's the handling of the specimen. So I think in obtaining the test and the handling this test is where you end up with the false negative results. It's not the fault of the PCR process itself. You know, once you have enough viral material, DNA material there, and then if it's really there, you can amplify it and you'll find it.
So what the takeaway here is, guys, is, you know, when you're hearing all the different accuracy percentages on the news, you can't focus completely on the test itself. There's obviously the component of how well the test was administered and then how it was handled after the fact.
Correct.
Okay, so let me jump in.
I would definitely, it's almost like I would feel more comfortable with a cholesterol results done in a large laboratory with quality standards as opposed to one of the quick, you know, in a doc in a box offices. Some of the quick point of care tests for the COVID, I'm not as comfortable with the quality, sensitivity, and specificity there. They're not as good.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to move on to and probably run very quickly through what we're seeing in underwriting right now in terms of post-COVID infection guidelines. And we kind of separate this in 4 buckets. Kind of like, you know, you tested positive but no symptoms, or maybe you tested positive, had some mild symptoms, recovered at home. Moving on to a more moderate situation where you tested positive, you actually needed to be hospitalized, maybe some supplemental oxygen, maybe some treatment, and then obviously the most severe cases, intubation, ICU, that whole gamut. So what we're basically seeing with that kind of first and second bucket, I know I tested positive, I had symptoms, maybe I didn't have symptoms, but I tested positive. Most of the companies are waiting a month before they'll underwrite you. Many of them want APS records after the fact. One thing I don't understand is I do have one carrier that wants 2 negative tests after a person has tested positive, even if they just were either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic and recovered at home. Can you explain if that would even be possible to achieve? I mean, wouldn't you just presume once the symptoms are gone that the test would be negative? And what doctor would actually run that test if a person was asymptomatic? Do you have any comments on that one?
My comment is they don't want your business. I mean, I think it's unreasonable. You know,
Yeah.
come on.
Well, that's what we told them too.
When they do things that I consider stupid, and I don't, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but it doesn't make any sense. And you have to push back. You know, if they say, I can see waiting 2 weeks if somebody said they're somebody in their family. But why wait 30 days? We know the incubation period the mean is 5 days. Almost everybody has it by 14. So if it's been 21 and they still won't issue the policy, you need to push back and say, listen, where are you getting your data that shows you have to wait 30 days? You know, they're making doing unrealistic things that are unscientific.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they're reinsurers. But anyway, okay. So moving on to that more moderate, what we're seeing on the most aggressive side, so this is your moderate case, you've been hospitalized, maybe you needed some treatment, supplemental oxygen, but normal floor, not in the intensive care or anything like that. On the most conservative side, we're seeing 3 months postpones. And then on some of the more aggressive side, it's also like a 30-day or a 1-month postpone from the day your symptoms have subsided. 30 days, some 90 days, and then we can underwrite an issue. And then it gets really tricky when it comes down to the guidelines for folks that were admitted to ICU and ventilated, because there's a whole other slew of complications that can come from just that induced coma ventilation process. So on the lightest end, I'm seeing that they'll look at your case after 3 months. But then we also have many companies that are saying postpone 6 months, some all the way up to 2 years, depending on how bad the situation was. And then, quite frankly, the underwriting will then be determined by what kind of, what does your pulmonary function look like now? What does your cardiovascular status look like now? You're kind of going to end up breaking it apart into the systems, just like we do in underwriting today. So that's what
I wouldn't
we
be
have
at all surprised.
so far.
Yes, I wouldn't be at all surprised to have these carriers. And there are no underwriting rules right now on this business. It's all fluid. These are just guidelines for underwriting, and different companies differ dramatically in how they're going to approach a person who's been exposed to the COVID virus right now. I wouldn't be at all surprised because of the complications of someone being on a ventilator, the neurological complications specifically, that the carriers wouldn't want to see a senior supplement exam, the neurological component of the exam, on younger population. Right now, they're required on people ages 70 and over. I wouldn't be at all surprised that carriers would drop that to age 60, perhaps, for the senior supplement and with exams going forward.
Okay. All right. So in terms of the carrier restrictions, just in the past, probably week to 10 days, we've seen about 3 companies loosen up a little bit on cases over age 70. All of those clients have to be a standard risk, and I'm sure there's 15 caveats about what kind of pre-existing condition they can or can't have. But on the positive side, we're seeing some of that loosen up. Dennis, do you want to talk about foreign travel?
Yeah, real quickly here. 2 months ago, when COVID was hitting us hard, all of the companies shut down on foreign travel. If you were traveling outside of the United States, you were postponed until you got back to the United States and put a 30-day quarantine behind you without the coronavirus. Now they're loosening up. What we're seeing is the most aggressive or the most lenient of the carriers right now. I still don't believe anybody is insuring somebody right now at this moment in time. If you're planning on traveling outside of the United States to, say, France for a wine tour this fall, you're going to be postponed until you get back. However, Nationwide has stepped up and advised us just this week that as of August the 1st, they will consider people who have planned foreign travel to the level 1 countries. And those are the ones that you're usually seeing that are not the high-risk countries. Okay, but they also indicated to us that if you're planning on going to Greece or Italy or France or something like that, the level 1 countries, you better get your application in after August the 1st. And if there is a spike in worldwide COVID cases, they can pull that back at any time, of course, and postpone you once again. Okay, but I think that that is very, very good news relative to the COVID infection.
Yeah, I don't want to, end on anything negative, but I think it's important for the producers listening that we got word yesterday that Lincoln is suspending their table shave program. So we'll send out a little bit more information about that and the dates that we have to get applications. And that has more to do with the low interest rate environment than it does the COVID pandemic, but something I want to, while I have your ear, let you know about. Quickly,
yeah, check the Agency One website because the ladies are keeping that site absolutely current on COVID updates.
Yeah. Quickly on exam requirements, we are still seeing Prudential, Lincoln, Principal, Nationwide, and I'm forgetting somebody else. There's definitely at least 5 companies that are actively using APS information to satisfy exam requirements. Obviously, these are your under age 60, 65, under 5 million, most of them under 3 million, but they really are, we're using human API to get the APS records, or lab picture to get the labs, and they're satisfying, and that is still ongoing. At least John Hancock and even some of the others have already indicated they're having talks with their reinsurers to try to keep some of these temporary guidelines going moving forward, because we all know that nobody wants to go backwards. But then just to reiterate, for those clients that do need to have the insurance exam, as Betsy covered before, there are a lot of safety precautions in place for that. I think that's about all I have, and I don't see
That's
any
awesome.
questions in the inbox. So if that's all, thank you so much, Betsy and Dr. Frank, for joining us today. I hope everybody found this beneficial. And of course, if you have specific questions, call myself, Dennis, Julie, and we've got spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of information that we're trying to keep straight to help you get your cases placed. So thanks, everybody, and have a really great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jessica. Bye-bye.
Okay. So this is Kathy Neifeld. Again, thank our esteemed panel for their time. And if you've got any questions, comments, concerns, if Agency One can help you in any way, please reach out to your Agency One case manager, Dennis, Ed Lesher, myself, Gonzalo. We are happy to help you. We are moving cases. We are placing cases. Dennis and his team are in active negotiation on all of your cases. Everybody is available. So thank you for your time. I know we ran over a little bit. My apologies. But I hope that everybody found this helpful, and please look for the next invitation for another meaningful webinar that we will be hosting next week. So with that, everyone stay safe, happy, and have some fun. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.